Star Trek Discovery has hit its mid-season break, which means the answer to the only question worth asking, can it get worse, is, for the time being at least, no. At least until it kicks off again in February, when normal dis-service will no doubt be resumed. I've done a video already looking at where it all went wrong, the poor writing, the poor decisions that were made, but I thought the time was right to look at the how and the why it's all gone wrong, how it is that the fans have come to be so badly let down, taken for granted, and how the series has somehow managed to continue despite the fact that so many people are pissed off and turning off. The last video I did on this show was purely to get it out of my system. I thought it astounding that it could have got all the way to a fourth series powered on nothing but self-satisfaction. We can't quantify its success, or more likely its failure, by the usual metrics of earnings and ratings because these figures are not released. There's much to be said for the way TV has evolved, there is at least much to be said about it, but streaming services have proven a nightmare for transparency. It's much more difficult to judge the health of the industry in general, and it's almost impossible to judge the health of individual series because all we have to go on is press releases from studios and producers. And if you believe what CBS says about the astounding success of New Trek, I've got an exciting new Star Trek series to sell you that's already selling better than Shakespeare, Stephen King and J.K. Rowling combined. We can read between the lines and speculate that CBS is not very keen on stressing the performance of its principal money burners is interesting. We've heard how much they cost, with Picard and Discovery in particular having budgets comparable to those of major Hollywood blockbusters. But you'll search in vain to hear the studio bragging about their success in anything but the vaguest terms. Way back at the launch of the first series, we heard of how it had been a boon for subscriptions and app downloads, and this was at least believable. Star Trek is a big IP, with a loyal and established fanbase. Just as broadcasters are willing to pay more for sports broadcasting rights than they can possibly hope to make back from the broadcasts themselves, studios with existing, new and planned subscription services, like Paramount Plus, will shell out millions on TV productions, not for the ratings, but for the guaranteed income of an engorged subscriber base. But this of course says nothing about the quality of the shows themselves. And what limited information there is about Star Trek Discovery suggests it has not been performing well. The first episode of Series 1 boasted 9.5 million viewers, while Series 3 averaged just 1.7 million, comfortably bested by reruns of The Masked Singer. Christ. Watching the series, though, you can see why. My last video on this show, again done solely to purge it from my system, got about as many views as I imagine the average episode of Season 4 has got. It's anecdotal evidence, but when a new channel like ours, with barely 20 subscribers at that point, gets a reaction like this, that suggests a substantial faction within the Trek base has switched off both figuratively and literally from what is supposed to be the marquee Trek series of our day. Sometimes this is a political thing. We've complained many times on this channel that modern film and TV can make high fantasy and rom-coms and Christmas comedies seem alarmingly similar because of the way each and every one of them elevates messaging over plot, and that messaging is always and everywhere the same, regardless of context. So it's inevitable that some people are pissed off by modern offerings. Ironically, given that the messaging constantly affirms the value of inclusivity, the overt politicking of modern film and TV is incredibly exclusionary. But it was heartening for me, and less so, I imagine, for the writers of Discovery, and especially those who are bankrolling it, that the response to my last video was bipartisan. As a result of that video, I've met and engaged with people who would profoundly disagree on a huge amount politically, but who've been united against Star Trek Discovery because they view it as a disgrace to the thing that they are likewise united in their affection for, the point and purpose, past and present, of Star Trek as a franchise. There are few reasons to be cheerful about modern politics, but I'm choosing to take this as a damned good sign. It's proof that our culture and our politics are not one and the same thing. It's proof that there is much in our culture that remains unifying, and much about our cultural history that's a source of real pride, no matter where one stands on issues of contemporary politics. And it's proof that the monopolization of our culture by a tiny faction of political activists is uniting people in opposition to it. There will come a time when Star Trek Discovery's profound unpopularity, assuming we're reading the tea leaves correctly, and that is the truth of the matter, becomes too great for the studio and its financiers to ignore. That point should have come a long time ago. But one of the major downsides to streaming and subscription services is that it's made the fans less important, not more. It doesn't matter very much if all those people who subscribed to CBS and then to Paramount Plus continued watching after their first episode of Star Trek Discovery, so long as they did not cancel those subscriptions. If people subscribe because of Star Trek, hate what they see, but find something else on that service to watch or to use, then Star Trek Discovery has done its job. As far as studios and subscription services themselves are concerned, there are merits to this approach, but those merits are completely divorced from the merits of the series they're producing. It's something fans will have to wake up to if they want this to change. If you've been lured in by a very specific promise, and that promise has been broken, and if that promise was important to you, you shouldn't stick around and give the service the benefit of the doubt. You shouldn't say, well, I came for Star Trek and that was shit, but at least there's reruns of Filthy Rich I can watch. No, you should cancel your subscription. There are other ways to try before you buy. The studio has absolutely no incentive to care about Star Trek if you go along with the business model and allow yourself to be signposted by it to other things. The precise circumstances that led to Discovery being pulled from Netflix aren't exactly clear, but I don't think we should read it as proof that fans are waking up to the cold reality of streaming service cynicism. Netflix was willing to front an awful lot of money to secure those streaming rights, precisely because of the motive described above. Had Netflix turned around and said, thanks but no thanks to Season 4, then perhaps this could have been taken as proof that Star Trek Discovery had exhausted its utility. But, as best we can tell, that is not what happened. Quite the reverse. CBS is betting that the exclusive distribution of future seasons of Discovery will be a boon for its own streaming service, Paramount Plus. And if you want proof of how streaming has made the fans themselves so much less important, consider that it's confining Star Trek Discovery to a service that the vast majority of fans around the world have no access to. Paramount Plus won't be available to large parts of the international market until later this year, while existing fans in the US, previously able to enjoy Trek content on the largest services, Netflix and Amazon Prime, will now be expected to shell out even more on yet another subscription service that has already proven it doesn't care about the quality of the IP it's using as bait. And I can't not talk about the quality of the IP. The first couple of seasons had some merits. They had an abundance of flaws, to be sure. Its inability to give us likeable characters, for one. But it did at least try and give us characters, and to equip those characters with understandable motives. I'm not saying it did any of this well, but at least it tried. The stories were questionable, but again, at least the show thought it should have a story. And in Jason Isaacs, there was at least one versatile actor able to bring believability to what was regrettably an utterly unbelievable plot. Mirror universes like time travel are almost never utilized well in film or on television. The idea is there, sometimes, but like almost any episode involving the holodeck on old Trek, you knew from the off that the goal was not to explore a concept but to utilize a contrivance, and a cheap contrivance at that. That Jason Isaacs was able to do anything with what the role set out for him is an achievement we should appreciate all the more, given that the writers managed to make Michelle Yeoh's Captain Georgiou so utterly ludicrous, and she's not an untalented actress herself. She did the best that she could with the role she was given, but the role she was given was parodically dumb. Season 2's plotline with Control again had its conceptual merits, and it even delivered on some of them. It gave us Anson Mount's Captain Pike, a rare concession both to the fans and to the Star Trek lore that, not coincidentally, was popular enough to spawn a spin-off in Strange New Worlds. And series writer Akiva Goldsman has felt it necessary to point out that this new series will be more optimistic than Discovery and Picard, and take an approach more akin to the original series. It's hard not to read that as a response to one of the more widespread fan complaints about the two existing marquee series, and any response that isn't merely dismissive has to be taken as a positive development, though this is still Kurtzman Trek, so it'd be unwise to assume they won't cock it up. But the risk is that the wrong lessons are learned. My biggest complaint about Season 3 of Discovery wasn't that it was so dark, it's that it was so forgettable. Having decided to make Jesus Burnham responsible for all Star Trek lore, it then leapt forward in time to free itself from the lore it had already shown such scant regard for. And then it took this as an opportunity to introduce a Star Wars-like setting, without any of the life and character that makes that setting work in the first place. I've never enjoyed the Federation. I said in the introduction to my last video that I find Star Trek's technocratic utopianism dull and irritating. Positing a future in which it had fallen apart was, I contend, an interesting premise, and there was much that could have been done with it. But this is Star Trek Discovery, and if given a choice between the interesting and the mundane, it will reliably choose the mundane. Combine that with its utterly absurdist substitute for world-building, a magic cosmic event that led to all the used dilithium in the universe exploding, caused by a space autist locked in a simulated schoolroom somewhere in the middle of a nebula, unable to tear a universe apart with the power of his mind for reasons. And you're not left with very much spare cognitive capacity to ponder all the show's missed opportunities, because you're overwhelmed by the sheer nonsense of the opportunities it chose to take. Its ultimate flaw is to introduce us to a complex universe while being utterly incapable of making use of that complexity. Its writers and its actors lack the ability to render anything more complex than pastel colours and geometric shapes. Asking Sonequa Martin-Green to expand her acting range is like telling conjoined twins to walk in two directions at once, or asking a double amputee to perform ballet. Which brings us finally to Season 4, which has boldly chosen to double down on all the worst aspects of what went before it, and which has elevated Michael Burnham beyond Jesus to a power level that even Vegeta wouldn't have been able to hide. I've summarized some of its many flaws before. Episode 1 saw Burnham break the Kobayashi Maru through the sheer scope of her awesomeness, while relegating the truly consequential destruction of Book's home planet to a mere subplot or afterthought, the pieces of which we try and fail to pick up in subsequent episodes. Like The Burn, which was a very unfortunate name to use in a series we abbreviate to STD, the anomaly is a cosmic plot device, a cosmic contrivance, an ill-defined cliché the show can have pop up anywhere and everywhere the plot needs it to do something, to make anything it needs to happen. Episodes 3 through 7 present those who complain about the show's dark nature with a bit of a conundrum, because in a very important way the problem is the precise opposite. With the understandable exception of Book, given that his planet has just been blown up by space cancer, and perhaps the Federation president, because even Discovery can't contemplate putting complete faith in the character of a modern politician, the characters are entirely two-dimensional and uniformly positive. Far too positive to a comic degree. Episode 4 sees Tilly put in charge of a training mission that goes wrong when their ship crash lands, and I think this was another anomaly contrivance, though I don't quite recall, and I can't bring myself to watch it back, I must be honest. Her crew of trainees who've been rushed out of the makeup department before they are ready are for the most part surly teenagers who have no business being there, and the only one who emerges with any credit at all is the one who dies in the crash. They overcome their hastily manufactured differences as the monsters chasing them across Hoth give them time and space to hold a team-building exercise in which Tilly's constant chirpiness finally rubs off and causes them to realise that they're all lovely and intelligent people with a good deal in common after all, and all their ideas for how to escape the planet, despite being entirely exclusive and self-contradictory, were right, from a certain point of view. She then volunteers to go on a long run to lead the monsters away, and, well, I'll content myself with saying that she'd not have been my first choice for this role. The episode also sees Michael Burnham solve Brexit. Arrangements to bring one forgettable alien species back into the Federation appear to hit a hitch because they demand quite sensibly that they should be allowed to pull out if things don't work out. This entirely reasonable request is refused, putting the talks in jeopardy, until Michael Burnham offers herself, who else, to chair an independent committee, of course, and by so doing brings the whole galaxy together, naturally, because she's Michael Burnham, and there is nothing she cannot do. Episode 5 sees her solve America's modern prison problem and declare that refugees are welcome here, which is completely tedious, while we also see a bit more of the anomaly, which has the power to disappear and reappear at will. Apparently, nothing in the known universe has this ability, which is flatly untrue, and once again reveals this show's scant regard for the science it pretends to laud. We already know in the 21st century that quantum teleportation is a thing. Likewise, the ability of electrons to perform a quantum leap. It's flatly untrue to say that nothing can disappear and reappear at will. The plot of Star Trek Discovery frequently has inexplicable things appear at random with no tangible link to what went before. Anyway, because the anomaly has this unique ability, they conclude that the only logical explanation is that it is artificial and has been made by someone. You don't have to be a Vulcan to spot the problem with this logic. It is flatly ridiculous. But the plot needs it to happen so they can invent a mystical bogeyman species to provide some intent to the universe, which sets up the moral debate in Episode 8 about whether to make contact with the mystical species or instead to blow them up, a course of action preferred by a morally dubious character, who again defies the contention that nothing in the universe can simply appear at random, having been inserted in this fashion by the writers to make the moral debate possible. He, it turns out, crossed from a mirror universe and needs the power of the anomaly to go back and reunite with heavily implied boyfriend. Hell, they know mirror universes exist. They've been in one. This alone disproves the suggestion, A, that nothing in this universe can appear by magic, B, that it can only happen because it was intended, and C, that it must then have been manufactured with that intent. It just... They know this. They've literally done it themselves. My God. Oh, and fittingly for a show in which character is formed solely by reaffirmation of their love for one another, the ship's computer now has feelings. Somebody somewhere looked at this series and decided that the main problem was that they didn't spend enough time talking about their feelings, so a whole new character has to be given them. In this case, it's the ship's computer, Zora, which is overwhelmed by stress in episode 7 and has to be counselled by Grey, whose meta-subplot is that they have literally nothing else to do aboard the ship and no reason to be there. I quite agree. It has been mentioned previously in the series, in passing, but it was at least mentioned, that fully integrated sentient AI is forbidden in the Federation, which prompts another subplot in which they attempt to debate, with a counsellor so lacking in personality that he could easily have replaced the ship's computer, whether Zora now needs to be extracted. Again, a premise with which one can do a great deal, but which Discovery solves perfunctorily with feelings. Zora loves the crew and has memories attesting same, and is therefore deemed to be a new life form and not a sentient AI, somehow, thereby getting around the inconvenient law. And Gay Doctor's perfectly reasonable doubts about having a capricious emotional being with complete power over the ship are dispensed with because the crew loves each other and trust is important. Rightio then. If only HAL 9000 had given Bowman a kitsch montage of hugs and kisses, the entire plot of 2001: A Space Odyssey could have been avoided. This is all so lazy. I won't reiterate the points made in my last video about how and why all the characters have become so utterly shallow, but it bears repeating here that the problem is not so much that the show is too dark, but rather that its optimism is so nauseously simple. Simple characters have the simplest of relationships and motivations. There is no debate, no moral question, no difficulty that feelings cannot dispense with in just one short scene. I said in the other video that the show has an awful habit of incanting its way out of any perilous scenario through technobabble, and something very similar happens on the personal level, where strife between characters can be instantaneously done away with by the power of love. And we're only midway through Season 4. This mid-season break, supposedly designed to give the latest animated series, Star Trek Prodigy, time to relaunch itself, provides us some relief from this insufferable kitsch cloying symposium on Californian values, but it begins again in February, and there's no reason I can think of to look forward to that. There was a time when writing like this, when a show as abysmal as this, would have been cancelled because the ratings did not justify the colossal expense. There is absolutely no way in the old marketplace a couple of million views per episode would be deemed adequate return for a budget of around $8 million per episode. It's an obscene amount of money. But as I said at the top, we're not in the old marketplace anymore, and the usual ties between the show and its fans have been severed. In the old world, Star Trek Discovery simply wouldn't have been able to get away with any of this, with serving up cold sick covered in sprinkles to what little remains of its audience. But in the new world, it is still, obscenely, viewed as an asset. Obscenely and, if it continues to dupe people into taking out subscriptions with streaming services, correctly. We, the viewers, have not learned how to leverage our own power in this new context. The old ways are not working. But there must be a way. Ultimately, if we care about the future of beloved franchises like Star Trek, we'll have to learn how best to bring our weight to bear on the studios and their streaming services. And it seems to me that the best place to start would be not to subscribe until they've proven they will honour their pledges and commitments. Do not trust the adverts, do not trust the press releases, wait until you've seen the thing, and then make your judgment. And if they go back on what they've promised, if they continue to debase the very series that enticed us to subscribe in the first place, we should leave. There is no fishhook here, we aren't caught on the line. If you subscribed because of Star Trek, and you object to the cultural abuse you've been subjected to, you should cancel your subscription. That is the only way I can see for you to bring any weight at all to the decisions made by these studios, and it is the only way to make your message felt by those studios. If you want Discovery to end, And if you don't want Star Trek to go down this route again, you must find a way of making your voice heard. And until you do that, until we've all collectively found a way to do that, unfortunately, we're going to have to look forward to Season 5 of Discovery and Season 2 of Picard, and whatever other animated piece of garbage Alex Kurtzman has decided will fit the bill this week.